Begin the current Daf Pesachim Daf begin 9 lines down at the top of the Yommi. But the Gemara continues discussing the two halachas from the previous Daf and attempts to ask on one of the opinions of these two different machlekes. She is co-responsible because of joining us for today's Daf. Something we're going to discuss is, like we just said, we're going to have these two different machlekes which are discussing regarding the halachas of Kiddush and Brachas, and from these two machlekes we're going to attempt to bring a raya to one of these two different opinions. And then the Gemara discusses the reason that one cannot say Kiddush and Birchas Hamazon on the same cup of wine, but could say Kiddush and Havdalah on the same cup of wine. What would be the difference between those two different things? So the key terms of concept discussed in today's Daf are called which is that sometimes you'll say one type of case in the machlek is to tell you the strength of one opinion. This is the halacha that you don't make mitzvahs into bundles, because it looks like that you're not really interested in doing the mitzvah, you just want to get it done, so you do it together in the bundle. So we get the current Daf, and this is continuing regarding what we learned the previous Daf. We had a machlekes regarding making a bracha when you leave the place called Shina Makir. We held that even foods that ain't to the bracha acharayna la'acharein b'mukayman, which is basically like things like burn the fashas, things like water and fruit, that you don't have to make a bracha acharayna in their place. Even over there, that was where he disagreed with Rabbi Shmuel, even over there, Shina Makir in Tzarech Levar, a different location does not require another bracha. Now, our Daf starts off with another challenge to Rabbi Yochanan. The previous Daf we already challenged him. Now we start over another one. As the Gemara continues, Ela Taima. It's really a continuation of, we mentioned Brisa on the previous Daf, and we had said, Mantan Akiris, the top of this Amud, we quoted a Brisa, because we had asked it as a question on Rav Chizda. And we said, that Brisa is not difficult on Rav Chizda, from a previous Brisa is not difficult on Rav Chizda, because that's going like Rabbi Yehuda, who we quoted in this Brisa on the top of this Amud. But now the Gemara quotes and says, okay, wait a second, and actually let's quote the Brisa again, because the Brisa said that if it was Chaverim that was sitting around and they got up in the middle to go to shul, which Tosfos points out, it would sound from here that if a person forgot to daven, he remembers the middle of the meal, he could go and daven, even like a tchila. So halacha is, when they leave, they don't need a bracha l'mafreya, they don't need to make a bracha chen before leaving, and when they come back, ain't turn a bracha l'ketchila, they don't need to make a new bracha when they return to continue eating. That's what the Tanna Kama said. Yehuda qualifies this halacha, and he says, that's only when they leave over mixes chavim, somebody remained, then you don't need a bracha chen before leaving, and no new bracha when they return. But if they didn't leave over the mixes chavim, nobody remained, then Rabbi Yehuda said that they do require bracha chen before leaving, and a new bracha when they return. So now that's where our Gemara continues and says, okay, el time. So it sounds like that the reason why the halacha is like that, and the Gemara is pointing out the wording that we had mentioned also on the previous Daf, that it says va'akar ragleiha. So that implies that from foods that are to in the bracha acharayna la'acharein b'mukayman, that's because what's the words va'akar ragleiha we said in the previous Daf? That sounds like, okay, really they were here eating the meal. Va'akar ragleiha, after they got up, it's like an akira. That's meaning, why is it an akira? Because it's like a meal. It's like something that you need a bracha acharayna, like let's say you wash, like something that has a kaviyas. And that's where you don't need a bracha acharayna before leaving, and no new bracha when they return. And so that's what the Gemara says all the time. It sounds like that since these are things that require bracha in their place, that's why they're abundant disagree in Rabbi Yehuda. When they leave, even not with leaving over people over there, that was the machlekes Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanna Kama, as we mentioned at the top of this Amud. When they leave, ain't to the bracha l'mafreya, then you don't need a bracha for the bracha acharayna. When they come back from going to shul, ain't to the bracha l'ketchila, they don't need a new bracha when they're resuming the meal again. Regarding things that do not require a bracha acharayna in their place, meaning burn the fashas. According to Rabbanan, when you leave in the middle drinking that coffee, to the bracha l'mafreya, you would have to make a bracha acharayna. When they come back, to the bracha l'ketchila, you have to make a new bracha, because it's only things that are va'akar ragleihan that the Chacham are saying, yes, not like Rabbi Yehuda requires people to be left over. No one has to be left over. But it's got to be that you had washed on the meal, you had made a mezainis on something, so when you had that coffee, you had a Danish. So that's where you would say that, even if you didn't leave over someone, you don't have to make a new bracha. But if you, let's say, was just drinking coffee, you would have to make a bracha acharayna before you leave in a new bracha rishayna. So let me tell it to you, to Rabbi Yochanan. Let's say this is a refutation of Rabbi Yochanan that he said on the previous daf that Shinu Malkum, you don't need to make a new bracha, and he doesn't differentiate whether it's something that's twin bracha l'achrein or not. Again, we had brought in this brisa because of Rav Chisda from the previous daf, just to show you machlekes Rabbi Yehuda and the Chacham. But once we brought in this brisa, says the Gemara, let's refute Rabbi Yochanan from the previous daf. You see that Shinu Malkum, that the halacha is tzarich levarich when, at least if it's dvar she'enu twin bracha l'achrein b'mekayman. If you had a coffee, you had something that's a cup of water, you had something that's a bar nefashis, and that you do have to make a new bracha. That's not like Rabbi Yochanan. So on that, so the Gemara says, wait a second, didn't we already refute him one time from a brayso on the previous stuff? We already refuted him. Says the Gemara, name him nami tavat. Let's say this is also refutation from this brayso. What's the point of refuting him twice? So as Rashbam points out, if someone would resolve the first question, sometimes you have a good answer that would resolve it. Or some will say that maybe that brisa is mistaken, is an error because you'll prove it from other brises. But let's refute him at least from another source. So now Rabbi Yochanan will tell you that no. Even things that did not require bracha achrein in their place, meaning AKA burn the fashas. That nami ain't tzarich levarich. The truth is, when you leave the place and you go outside and you come back, you would not have to make a new bracha. Then why did the Tanna Kama say the case specifically of Okraglim that they lifted up, they uprooted their feet, which sounds like there was a kriyas over here. Because something that here you're in the middle of your session of eating because it requires a bracha achrein over here. If you're saying it's even something that's not Okraglim, that would not require a new bracha. That's like the Acha Koichet Rabbi Yehuda. There's two parties in this machlekes. There's the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda. You're right. For the Tanna Kama, we don't have to say Okraglim. Even without Okraglim, even if they were just eating something temporary like a vegetable or something like that you wouldn't have to make a new bracha when you leave, when you come back. Why are you saying Okraglim? To say the strength of the other opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Rabbi Yehuda is saying that even if it's something like a mezainis, like something that requires a bracha in its place, that only time of the nichu miktzas chabim, only if you left over some people at the Suda, that's when he says, if you go outside and you come back in, you're not going to have to make a new bracha. But if you didn't leave over some people at the meal, even if it's something that's okraglein, even something that requires a bracha in this place, even something that requires a alamichia or a benching, when they leave, you would have to make a new bracha. You have to make a bracha when you leave. When you come back in, you would require a new bracha when you come back in and start over again. But again, it has nothing to do with the Tanna Kama. The Tanna Kama hold, even if it's loyal koraglein, even if it's something that does not require bracha l'achrein, you would not have to make a new bracha. It's only to tell you the other picture of Yehuda that if you didn't leave over anyone, even in such a case, you would have to make a new bracha. Now that was one discussion from the previous daf, that of Rabbi Yochanan. Now additionally, in the previous daf, we had a machlekes Rav Chisda and Rav Sheshas. Rav Chisda said that shinu malkum, that we said you have to make a new bracha, is only, as we've been quoting, dvarim that don't require bracha l'achrein b'mukayim, like burn the fashas, and you can make it no matter where you went. But something that requires a bracha l'achrein b'mukayim, like ala milchia, then if you left, you don't have to make a new bracha. If Shesha disagrees, he says no. Echad zev. The bracha says no. Either one, when you do shinu malkum, even something like, let's say ala milchia, when you leave, you have to make a new bracha. Now Gemara says Tanya Kapasei Rav Chisda, have a brisa that supports like that of Rav Chisda. Well, what's the brisa? The brisa says Chaveim she'im mesubin l'shtis yayin. If you had a chevra, if you have a group of people that are sitting around drinking wine, and they got up, they left the drinking session, and they came back in. So Allah is that ain't tzrich levarich. They don't have to make a new bracha. As Rashbam points out, that's like Rav Chisda. Why? Because the things that require a bracha l'achrein b'mekayman, what does Rav Chisda say? He says you don't have to make a new bracha. So this is explicitly Rav Chisda, because what's the case talking about? Wine. Wine is something that's a chashuv thing. It's ala gefen, and it requires a bracha l'achrein. So therefore, this supports Rav Chisda, because as Rashbam points out, the other brisa where we brought, which was similarly saying the same exact case of people that were sitting around and okraglein, that doesn't explicitly say wine. But here we're saying wine, so that explicitly says, regarding like Rav Chisda says, that dvar, that shetunin bracha achrein b'mekayman, you would not have to make a new bracha. But one thing says Rashbam, from our sugi we see is that when you change the wine, you don't have to make a new bracha on the wine if it's just from a different barrel. But like we said in the previous daf, but if it's better wine, you have to make a teva meitiv. Changing your place with the shivas haminim requires a bracha achrayna b'mekayman, what's called me'in shalish, ala michya, ala eitz, ala gefen. So for example, if let's say someone's eating in this house and he eats in another house before he made a bracha achrayna, or you ate in this house and you went to the street and they finished the suda, all these cases, you would not have to go ahead and make a new bracha, because that's like we said in the previous stuff, the lekiva kamak other, you're coming back to your original suda, because like we just put a price that supports that other fruits and drinks, which are not from the shivas aminim, which do not require bracha in their place, you can make it wherever you went. So if you ate in this house, and when you ate in another house, you would have to make a new bracha. But from one corner to another corner in the same house, that do not require a new bracha, as we brought in the previous stuff in the Masnita, the Beir Rav Hinek. Now, he just points out one thing, since we wanted to say on the previous brisa, the Akrak Lane, K'dei Leilcha Beis HaMedrash, that's why it says Chaverim. Why Chaverim? Because the Chaver is the Talmid Chacham. Those are the ones that when he says Chaverim, Chaverim doesn't mean necessarily friends, it means a Chaver. Chaver is Talmid Chacham, that they were getting up to go to the Beis Medrash, and that's why it picks Chaverim, but it's not specifically that of Chaverim, it's anybody who's sitting around. Now the Gemara continues with another discussion we mentioned on Daf Kuf, which we had mentioned regarding the halach of hafsaka. We said if a person started his meal in the early afternoon of Erev Shabbos or Erev Pesach when it was permitted, and it continued all the way until the evening. So we had a machlekes, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda said mafsikin l'shabbosos, you have to interrupt the meal and you have to make kiddush, you have to stop. According to Rabbi Yossi, mafsikin says no, you can continue the meal, and after Birchas Hamazon, you make kiddush. Now the Gemara brings a brisa that elaborates on this machlekes. B'nei chabura, shorim b'subin, if you had people from a group that were sitting around, and they were eating on Erev Shabbos, but they started when you're allowed to start. B'kiddush alein hayeh. Now it's already getting dark, it's becoming Shabbos. So what do you do? So the first opinion says, Mevin like kois shalyan. They bring him a cup of wine. V'ayim kedushim. The guy makes kiddush on it. B'sheni in the second cup, ayim alav birchas hamazon, he benches on. That's Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Now this is like how Rabbi Yehuda had said from the previous stuff that you have to be mafsik. You have to stop your meal that you ate on Erev Shabbos. Now, however, since ultimately now that you have to stop your first meal, it's time to make kiddush, you have to first make kiddush and then make birchas hamazon. Rashi brings another gear. Rashi brings another gear. So that actually the first one you bench on, the second one you make kiddush, which would sound like, but it says that the sefta bracha sounds like the first shot. I mean, you would think, okay, bench and then make kiddush. No, right now you have to stop, but it's time for kiddush. Make kiddush, bench, and then you'll have your Friday night meal. You'll daven, you have your Friday night meal. He says, no, actually, where although it sounds like you continue eating until it gets dark, the Rashbam explains it, it really means eat until you finish your Suda. Meaning continue eating even from when it got dark. And that's Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, as we mentioned on Daf Kuf, that according to him you don't have to stop at all. So you can continue eating. Now as you continue with Beis, Gomru, when they finish their meal, then okay, the first cup you'll use your bench. And the second cup, you'll make kiddush. So this is Rabbi Yossi, and he's saying a kiddush that you don't have to make kiddush right away, right? You can finish your meal, and when you finish, you'll make birchas hamazon, and then you make kiddush. Now, however, Rashbam does point out, as he had said on the Kuf also, if you do paris mapa, if you cover it with a cloth and you make kiddush when it gets nighttime, then Rabbi Yossi would agree that for sure that's going to work. Because if you don't say that, and Rabbi Yossi is specifically saying, no, you have to make the first cup of wine, birchas hamazon, and then the second cup kiddush, then Shmuel on Daf Kuf, who's he going like? That he says paris map. It's not going to be Rabbi Yossi says you have to stop. It's not going to be Rabbi Yossi says no. The first you have to finish your meal, make birchas hamazon, make kiddush. Well, the paris map is neither one of those. It's covering it and it's making kiddush, and it's not stopping the meal like Rabbi Yehuda, and it's not Rabbi Yossi making birchas hamazon. Obviously, Rabbi Yossi is saying you could finish your meal, and then after you make birchas hamazon, then you make kiddush. But of course, he would say it's okay, and that's how Shmuel was being machmer to be paris mapa, make kiddush, and then continue your meal. Right. Yeah, the wording sounds like sounds like all the good. Yeah, that's the way the Rashbam explains it. That yeah, you continue going on and eating your meal. Now, so that was machlekes Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, which just elaborates a little bit more on that machlekes. That what do you do with the cups of wine? Because in Talmudic times they always benched with a cup of wine, so you have to have for the birchas hamazon and you have for that of Kiddush, and what's the order, what you're doing here as you continue or stop your meal. But now the Gemara asks the question and says, wait a second, why do you say this? Why don't you make both the Kiddush that you're making and the Birchas Hamazon, which each one requires a cup of wine? Why don't you say them both achad kasa on one cup of wine? In other words, the question is under Bisi. According to Yehuda, no. Since you're stopping and you have to do akiris al shulchan, you have to take away the table from your Erev Shabbos meal, of course you're going to have 2 cups. Like Taisa explains, because the Birchas Hamazon is going on your weekday meal, and the Kiddush is on the coming meal of Shabbos, so that's not appropriate to say them both on one cup. But according to Rabbi Yasi, who you finished your meal, you're benching and making Kiddush, why don't you 2 cups of wine? Why don't you give the same cup, bench, you bench, and then after you make Kiddush on the same cup of wine? What's these 2 cups of wine for if they're both happening here at the end of the one long meal and you finish the Shabbos Suda together? Some Rav Huna, Rav Sheish, just no, we don't make 2 sanctifications of that of Birchas Hamazon, it's calling like a Kedusha, which is like the Kiddush of Friday night. In other words, you don't make 2 mitzvahs, al kais echad, on 1 cup of wine, which actually interesting, Taisa says, that's why by chuppah, for this reason, there are those who have the custom not to say Sheva Brachas on the cup of the Birchas Hamazon. When they bench by the Sheva Brachas, they have 2 different cups. Why? Because they bring another cup, because they don't want to make the Bar Piragafen on the one that they already made the Birchas Hamazon, because it's not appropriate to make 2 different brachas on them. But Rabbi Shloimy said that no, you say it all on 1 cup, because you can't compare Birchas Hamazon and Kiddush, which are 2 different things, as the Gemara is going to tell us shortly. But here it's one thing, because the Birchas Hamazon is what's causing the Sheva brachas to be said, and therefore there would be no problem. But by a chuppah itself, that's by a regular Sheva brachas, like we do in the Shivas Mishnah, but by Birchas Eris and Nisuin, that diminishing is to have 2 different cups. And the reason is because actually they really come by themselves. As the Gemara says in Ksubit of Zayin Avez, that Birchas Erison they would make in the house of Erison. In Talmudic times they would get engaged, the halacha engagement 12 months before, and Birchas Sanim Beis Chasanim, so therefore they're 2 distinct things, therefore you have 2 different cups. And also because the minhag is to read the Ksubit between, and therefore that's a hefsek, and therefore they have 2 different cups by a chuppah to have these 2 different things, because again, we don't make 2 kedushas on 1 cup. Which Gemara says, my time, what's the reason? So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, a famous Talmudic dictum, we don't make mitzvahs into bundles. It looks like a load, like, okay, let's get done with this already. That's we don't do that with mitzvahs. We don't make it into bundles. You do each one individually, singular attention. So we don't, even though we have 2 mitzvahs right here to make together, Birchas Hamazon, another cup of wine, and Kiddush, a cup of wine, just use the same one. No, we don't bundle it together. We do them individually. Says the Bavai, and you don't? Are you telling me really that you don't make 2 mitzvahs on the same cup of wine? But Vatan, you learn the Brisa, it says like this: Hanechnes labeis Matzah Shabbos. Someone comes on Matzah Shabbos, so the first thing he does is mevarach ala yain. First thing he makes a bracha on the cup of wine, because that's what's called tadr. The most constant thing is a more common thing is to make a bracha on a cup of wine, and tadr is kaidim. Valamar, then he makes the bracha on the candle, by Mara'esh, and then Val B'samim, then he makes on the B'samim, by B'samim. Now, as one is wondering, it's not the order we do. Just like Bishamim said this brachas and the base that says that first you make the Ma'or, the candle, and then the B'samim, and then B'achkach Ema Havdalah Al-Kais. Then Havdalah is the last one, because the first brachas are short, and Havdalah is long, so therefore you say it at the end. Now, mainly, let's say you only have 1 cup of wine. So again, remember, Talmudic times they were very stringent about benching on the cup of wine whenever they had a meal, and you have to have Malava Malka on Motzei Shabbos, and you only have 1 cup of wine. So what you do is Manichal Akra Mazal. You leave that cup of wine till after you eat Malava Malka, which Tosfos points out from Rabbi Nisim. He says, wait a second, how can you eat before Havdalah? Gemara tells us later on, you don't taste anything before you make Havdalah. So he wants to say that he was talking about where you were eating from before, when you were eating still Shalashidus. You were eating from before Shabbos, and it got dark. Now, although you have to stop to make Havdalah, but that's what he wants to say regarding that. He says that this day, he says leave it after you finish your meal, not that it's permitted to eat. Rather, it means to say that when you stop your meal with Birchas Hamazon, then you'll make Havdalah. That's one way, but Tosfos finds that difficult because the wording Hanechnes Labeis sounds like that. It wasn't finishing Shalosh Shabbos. and then you're just stopping to make Havdalah, it sounds like that you weren't eating. Additionally, he brings the question from Chiel. The Gemara tells later on that on Daf Kofei that we infer from the Brisa that says that Toyim Mavdal, that even if you ate, you see that you're going to make Havdalah, because over here you see you're eating and then you're making Havdalah afterwards. But according to Mein Nissim, that's not true. It's talking about when you're eating from before, when it was still Shabbos, so there's no proof that you ate before Havdalah. So rather, says Taisus that no, you're right. In general, like the Gemara is going to tell us later on, you don't eat before Havdalah. When you only have 1 cup of wine, you're permitted to eat before Havdalah so that you could make on that cup Birchas Hamazon too. So in other words, this would be an exemption of that law of, under these circumstances, you're allowed to eat before Havdalah. But leave it as it may. You leave the cup of wine till after you bench, and then you chain them, like it's from the word of shalshel, so a chain, which you connect them together with the Birchas Hamazon. But one thing says the Gemara that you see that you're making 2 brachas in 1 cup. You're going to make Havdalah and Birchas Hamazon. Is that good? Didn't you tell me you don't make it Chavis, you make 2 Kiddush in 1 cup? So it says the Gemara, Ein Lo Yisham. No, if a person doesn't have, that's different. He has no choice. He doesn't have wine for 2 cups. We're talking about where he has wine for 2 cups. If you don't have husners, then you make it in 1 cup. And that's what the guy has only 1 cup, we said. So then you'll wait till after Birchas Hamazon to make Havdalah. But if you have 2, you'll make 2. So, but the Gemara rejects this too, because by Yom Tov Shechal Yisachar Shabbos, when Yom Tov falls on a Matzah Shabbos, the Islay, where a person has other cups of wine, V'amar Rav Yakner, and Rav says, you do, as we'll explain in the next daf, what's called Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah. Now, the Gemara assumes right now that we're talking about by the first night of Pesach, which is on Matzah Shabbos, where a person has many cups of wine, because we learned in the beginning of this parak in our Pesachim that even under Shabbat Yisrael, every Jew has to have 4 cups of wine. And so therefore, when you're making the first kais, you're saying yakna, which Taisa discusses, wait a second, that each cup actually has a purpose. How could you're still going to be stuck with that question. But Al Kapanim, you have more than 1 cup of wine. And Rav says yakna. So obviously the Kiddush, what's yakna? Yain, Kiddush, Ner Havdalah. So you're making Kiddush and Havdalah 1 cup of wine, and the guy has more than 1 cup of wine. Didn't you tell me then you don't do them chavilas? So they said, no. From the fact that in this halacha, Rab didn't say yaknahaz, which we'll say in the next stuff, that's another thing when you have a shechayanu to make, which is called zman. He didn't mention shechayanu. Obviously, we're talking about not the first night of Pesach, because the first night of Pesach would be saying zman too, he'd be saying shechayanu. We're talking about achar, we're talking about the last days of Pesach. Now, maybe he's a poor person and he only has 1 cup of wine. Because the chomai, the havali, whatever he had, ochalei already ate up already on the first days of Pesach, but Leslie doesn't have. So there's no raya that he was talking about that he has more than 1 cup of wine, and therefore he's making Kiddush and Havdalah on the same cup of wine. But you're right, if he had more than 1 cup, then you're right, he would make it on 2 different cups. But the Gemara says no, because by Yom Tov Rishon, the Islay, first I have night of Yom Tov, when a person, like we said, even the poorest person, a Jew, that doesn't have less than 4 cups of wine, V'ama Abaye, and Abaye says, and this will be the discussion on the next daf, what's exactly done. His order is Yak Zena. We'll see a real long machlokes regarding what the order is. But he says the order is Yain Kiddush Zman Ner Havdalah. V'Rav Yak Nahaz, which is the well-known one, that the halacha is that you make Yain, make it by Pergofen, then Kiddush, then Ner, the Havdalah, and Ner is the Barber Eish, Hey is Havdalah, and Zman, then you make Shechion at the end. One thing you see, that is the first night of Pesach, because you said that you're making Zman, which is Shechiyanu, and still you see making Kiddush Havdalah in the same cup of wine. Didn't you tell me that you don't make it when you have more than 1 cup of wine? So the Gemara says, you're right. You have to differentiate and say, Havdalah v'Kiddush chodemilsi. Making Havdalah and Kiddush is really the same thing. Both of them are for the sanctity of the Yom Tov, and even Havdalah itself, we mentioned Kiddush is Yom Tov. We make Hamavim and Kodesh l'Kodesh. So even in over there, it's mentioning the Kiddush Yom Tov, that's the same thing. So yes, that's not a problem considered of making 2 mitzvahs on 1 cup of wine, because it's the same mitzvah. Kiddush and Havdalah is the same idea. But Birchas Hamazon, the Kiddush, 3 million, but benching and Kiddush are 2 totally different things. One's on the food that you ate, one's on the Kiddush Zayim, and therefore that's considered 2 different things. And that's what we're saying, that we're not going to make mitzvahs chavilas. But regarding that of Kiddush Havdalah, that's not a difficulty where we make it 1 cup of wine. So we're going to discuss in today's daf and Psachim Daf Kuf Beis But we said no. It's not going to be another refutation of Rabbi Yochanan, which he said that you're never going to make a new bracha when you're doing shina makom, even something that's like a cup of coffee that's like a bar nefashis. From the brayso we mentioned the previous stuff, which said specifically in the Tanakama that only when it's akrag lehen, when you were eating something that had a kviyas and you left in, you don't need a new bracha. Not like Rabbi Yehuda who says you got to leave someone over. No, the truth is even if it was not akra, meaning even if it was something like bar nefashis, still the Tanakam would hold like Rabbi Yochanan that you would not have to make a new bracha when you come back. So why did he pick out Greg Lehin? Sounds like only over there. No, that's to tell you the strength of Rabbi Yehuda. That even when you have a zalak, ala micha, ala gefno, bechaz amazon, which that's a real kviyas, still Rabbi Yehuda would say that you would have to make a new bracha achrayna, you have to make a new bracha rishayna when you didn't leave over anyone over there. But for the Tanakam, you're right, it would even be something that would not require an ala micha. And then the Gemara brought a brayta to support Rav Chizda again that he said that this halacha of shina makom is only by something that's tuin bracha that ain't tuin bracha lachrein. But if it's tuin bracha lachrein, then not like Rav Sheshes, he held that you would not require a new bracha. Then we went back to a machlokes from the previous daf from Daf Kuf, which Rabbi Yehuda had said that when you were eating from before Shabbos, that the halachas you have to be mafsik. So he said the first cup of wine you make kiddush. Even though you have to stop, but you would think you make Bechas Hamazon, but the Girsa that Rashbam preferred was that no, the first cup you make Kiddush because it's already time for Shabbos, so make Kiddush, and the second cup you make Bechas Hamazon. Bisiu says that no, you don't have to stop your meal. He says, you continue eating. When you finish, you make Bechas Hamazon, the second cup you make that of Kiddush, as we explained in the quote from the Rashbam, that's still going on the Shabbos Suda, and even though you already ate, you can make Kiddush when you're done. Now, but one thing we see according to Rabbi Yisi, that when you're finishing everything, you're done, you're benching and you're making kiddush and you're going to go to sleep. So why don't you make it on one cup of wine? And we see that you make on a cup of wine because we find by kiddush and avdallah by yak nahaz that you can't say ein lo shani because there we see that he does have because it's the first night of Pesach because he's saying also zman, which is the first night of Pesach. So no, that's what the Gemara ultimately says because that's chad milsi. Saying kiddush and avdallah is the same idea, but over here. We're saying that you have Birchas Hamazon and you have that of Havdalah, which those are two different things. They were going to say Nois and Mitzvah Chavaz. We don't make mitzvahs into bundles, and therefore that's why we're not going to make it on one cup of wine. Think it to any time for those things.